Today's recipe was requested by one of our trusted viewers, and being very happy with the results we've managed to achieve, we decided to share it with you. The request was for a dessert-like dish with an intense lemony taste. Due to this specific request, we decided not only to make a lemony dessert, but also to make a vegan version of one of the most famous sweet sauces in the whole world, custard. We will use lemon for this recipe, but you are free to flavor this delicacy with everything you like, being it vanilla, chocolate, or any other preferred flavor. Now, this preparation is really simple, and in fact only takes less than 10 minutes to prepare. So let's start by pouring the non-dairy milk into a pot. Now dip in the starch, the sugar, the turmeric, and mix well to combine. Now grate the zest of one beautiful and yellow lemon into the pan. At this point, if you want to obtain a differently flavored custard, you can substitute the lemon zest with your preferred flavoring. Once the zest has been added, whisk again and turn on the heat on high. From now on, you want to stir continuously so that the mixture maintains a uniform temperature. For this task, we are using one of our favorite rubber spatulas, as they are perfect to easily remove any mixture from the sides and the bottom of the pan. During this step, I wouldn't suggest you to move away from the stove, unless of course you like the taste of burnt custard. But last time I checked, we weren't preparing crème brûlée, right? Anyway, as soon as the mixture reaches a near to boiling temperature, the starches will begin to gel and will turn the liquid into a proper, thick and delicious custard. As soon as the liquid starts to thicken, stir even faster to avoid the annoying formation of lumps, which are all but desirable. An important thing to mention before you jump into making this recipe is that if the custard is meant to be used as a filling or to be eaten with a spoon, then you definitely want to make it thicker as we did here, but if it is needed as a thin sauce, then you should slightly decrease the total quantity of starch to obtain the desired consistency. Always remember that if the custard ends up too thick, you can always thin it down with a touch of extra milk. But unfortunately, you cannot increase the thickness, and if it ends up too thin, you are going to keep it that way. Also, be warned, the custard will thicken even more when it is placed in the fridge to cool completely. The last two things to mention are, first, that you should pour the custard into a bowl when it's ready and stir it every few minutes until it gets cold, as this will avoid the formation of the drier superficial layer, also known as skin. Nobody wants skin in their custard. Besides, it sounds very un-vegan-like. Secondly, this custard can be served warm or cold. And there you have it, a fully vegan and fat-free custard which tastes out of this world. We were quite shocked when we realized that no eggs or cream were needed to prepare this perfect custard. Hello and welcome to part 1 of our mini-series on meal prep tips and guidelines, meal size and containers. Do you want to know how to prepare great food that is cheap, delicious, and at the same time stores well for as long as possible? Whether you are a student, a busy mom, or simply a chap with the most wicked and hectic lifestyle, rest assured that by the end of this mini-series, you'll have all the right knowledge to prepare your meals in the most nutritious, inexpensive, and safe way possible. Let's begin, shall we? Let's start from the most important thing of all, the size of your meals. This strongly depends upon how many times you eat in a day, your age, your activity level, and any other factor that might contribute to an increased or decreased caloric expenditure. A typical meal generally contains no less than 600 calories to be considered such, which in most cases is enough to keep you going for a few hours on a busy day. And since meal prep videos are meant to offer standard-sized meals, it is always up to you to decide when to scale a recipe up or down in order to meet your personal needs. Keep in mind that the volume of a meal doesn't necessarily equal to its calories. In fact, it is once again up to the cook, his common sense and experience to propose the balanced meal that will not only provide you with as much nutrition as possible, but will also be small and easy to carry around. You might think that since there are no limits to what you can cook for your lunch or dinner, the same principles apply to preparing food in advance. But this is hardly the case. For example, what do you think will keep better in the fridge for a few days? Some pasta mixed with a tomato sauce? Or some whole grain rice sautéed with vegetables and a sauce on the side? Obviously the rice will invariably win this one, as many other grains would. For those who don't like the pleasure that comes from biting into something that resembles glue, Our tip to prepare meals that are likely to preserve well is to make dishes that are more on the dry side, so that by retaining more of the original consistency and crunch of the ingredients, they will also preserve better for a few days. You can always keep a killer sauce on the side and add it on top of the food to enrich it just before eating it. Foods that don't easily retain their consistency for long, like bread, are much better when prepared fresh or when kept in the freezer, thawed and reheated when needed, rather than left to the elements. A frozen slice of bread can be thawed in as little as 1 minute in a microwave, and it is sure to have a much better taste and consistency than the same slice of bread left in the fridge for 3 days and reheated. And now to the object that will keep your food fresh and make it easy to carry around, the food container. The kind of container to use for your food is entirely a matter of personal choice, and sometimes even a cultural one. However, I believe that there are a few key aspects to keep in mind before buying one. For me, a good food container should be light in weight, raise your hand if you want to carry more weight than you need, of an appropriate size and easily transportable, generally between half a liter and 1 liter in volume, or 1 to 2 pints would work for the most of us, reusable, I don't like waste, dishwasher and microwave safe for easy cleaning and warming of the food, properly sealed with a leak-proof lid to keep the saucier of us at bay, and BPA free. There are plenty of containers that meet all of these specifications, and I strongly suggest you to get your hands on one if you haven't already. Some people would argue that you should also completely stay away from using plastic, but personally I don't mind using a reusable plastic container as long as it meets all the requirements mentioned before. If you don't know what BPA is, there is a link in the description below, or you can simply Google it, which always works. The fact that we plan on preparing meals in advance doesn't necessarily mean that we also have to forget about fresh foods. It is always a great idea to keep a bowl of almost ripe to ripe fruits hanging around, and some fresh vegetables in the fridge like celery, cucumber, tomatoes, etc. I personally find that including these ingredients in their raw state in a meal prep video would be utterly ridiculous, because there is nothing to prepare. However, these foods make great snacks during the day, so remember that they exist and that they can also be incredibly nutritious and delicious as well. Some of our favorite options are mangoes, bananas, mangoes, dried fruits, nuts and seeds, mangoes, raw leafy greens, and salads in general. Did I mention mangoes already? I really like mangoes. Hello and welcome to part 2 of our series on meal prep tips and guidelines. This episode is all about food cost, safety, and meal structure. So if you'd like to keep the price of your meals low without sacrificing their quality, well, you are on the right video. Let's get cracking. It is a no-brainer that a plant-based diet can be incredibly inexpensive, especially if you shop smart and eat the right foods. Things like whole grains, legumes, spices, greens, and vegetables in general happen to be amongst the cheapest foods available in the world. We live in the UK, which was the 12th most expensive country in the world last year, with a cost of living index of 81 in 2016. Nonetheless, most of the ingredients we use are still relatively low cost. To give you an example, we can find brown rice for less than £1.50 per kilo, which would be around $1 per pound in the US at the time the video was made, dry pulses for about £2 per kilo, $1.25 per pound, and vegetables like carrots, broccoli, onions and peas for about £1 per kilo on average, around 65 cents per pound. To make everything more clear to those who prefer the actual price of the final meal, let's do some easy maths, which by the way is the only maths my brain can handle. 1 kilogram of brown rice plus 1 kilogram of chickpeas plus 1 kilogram of a random vegetable like carrots or peas provide about 7,750 calories, which divided by 600, the calories of a standard meal we decided in the previous episode, makes a total of 13 meals, give or take. Now, for the sake of being more abundant, let's say that we'd rather opt for meals of 775 calories each. So now it's 10 meals in total, and it's even easier for my brain to handle. Well, all of those calories would cost me about £4.50 or 45 pence per meal, about 55 cents per meal in the US. Now, can you see how cheap a single healthy meal can potentially be? Obviously, I'm not asking you to thrive on brown rice, chickpeas and carrots, but as far as I know, a meal that costs £1 in the UK or $1 in the US is pretty damn cheap. So according to the maths we did just a moment ago, and assuming that they are correct, and trust me, I wouldn't count on that, you would still have 55 pence or 45 cents to invest in any extra spice, herb, condiment you like before hitting the £1 or $1 ceiling, and that is if you do want to lift the flavor of the meal. And I didn't even mention the frozen and canned food aisles, the possibility to buy in bulk, and the opportunity to eat seasonally, which can all greatly contribute to lowering the price of your food quite dramatically. We love the idea of consuming a variety of different foods throughout the day, and these foods tend to be fruit and berries, vegetables, grains, nuts and seeds, legumes, greens, herbs, and spices. This doesn't mean that you have to eat this way yourself, or to pack every single one of these ingredients into each bite you take, but we believe that it helps a lot to lay down some simple rules on how the structure of a simple meal could be, and what staple ingredients should include in order to be considered nutritious. Obviously, the food combinations you could use to create interesting flavors are endless, but when it comes to nutrition, the rules are simple. Rotate the ingredients you use as much as possible, try to be seasonal whenever feasible, and eat a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables. I had a friend who used to carry a broccoli head in his right pocket at all times, and munch on it whenever he desired. Although this might be considered a healthy habit, it is also too extreme for most folks, and unlikely to be necessary even for more seasoned vegans, so I would recommend to stick to more classic eating patterns. Hello and welcome to part 3 of our mini-series on meal prep tips and guidelines, health, safety, and storage. Would you be able to say what's the best way to properly store your cooked food? We'll answer that in just a moment. A very important aspect of meal prepping is that the food you prepare should always be consumed within 2 days or 3 days tops. I can hear you saying, but isn't the point of meal prepping to make food in advance for a week or even more? Well, unless you really enjoy gambling with your own health, and trust me, some people really like that kind of thrill, you should never keep prepared food for that long in the refrigerator. As simple as that. Pretty much every respectable health and food safety organization in the world agrees on this, and state that leftovers, which is what meal prepared in advance really are, leftovers, should be consumed within 48 hours after preparing and never be reheated more than once. There are exceptions to the rule, obviously. Rice, for example, is considered a low-risk item due to the low levels of protein contained in it. This is because, although they can grow in just about any food, bacteria are particularly fond of protein-rich ingredients. Interestingly, the kinds of bacteria that are more likely to give you food poisoning are exactly those that thrive in protein-rich environments, rather than the type that thrive on starch and sugars. For this reason, plant-based foods are generally considered safer than animal food, but they are obviously not risk-free. Remember that regardless of the food you are trying to preserve, the longer you keep it in the fridge, the more you risk giving yourself food poisoning of some form. The so-called danger zone, the temperature range in which food-borne bacteria can grow, is between 4 and 60 degrees Celsius, or 39 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why it is mandatory to keep your food either below 4 degrees Celsius, or 39 degrees Fahrenheit, or above 60 degrees Celsius, or 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Or to make it even simpler, to keep cold food cold and hot food hot. In regard to refrigerating your food, the most common cause of foodborne illness is in fact improper cooling of cooked food. Since bacteria are literally everywhere, cooked food should always be placed in shallow containers for quick cooling and refrigerated as soon as possible, to prevent the bacteria from getting back into your food and reproducing. If you want to know more on the topic, there are some interesting links in the description below the video. Also, upon inspecting a specific food, remember that you should never use it if it's discolored, moldy, or has an off smell. You should also not consume products that spurt liquid or foam when the container is opened, and most important of all, you should never ever taste a product to determine its safety. I know, we all do that at some point, but we shouldn't, okay? If I really had to prepare a whole week's worth of food in advance, then freezing it would be my best bet for both preserving the flavors and to prevent food poisoning. Although freezing does affect the consistency of some ingredients, it is a much safer option than refrigerating, especially since your own health is at stake. Reheating frozen food is virtually as easy as reheating refrigerated food, so in that regard it doesn't really make much of a difference. But how can you tell if a food will freeze well or not? A good rule of thumb is to have a look at the frozen food aisle of a supermarket. Whatever food you see in there will most likely freeze beautifully at home as well. This is an easy trick that within seconds will give you a better understanding about what foods you can efficiently cook and freeze in the comfort of your home, without impacting too much on flavor and consistency. Besides, those frozen food packages have instructions too. So there you go, you now have instructions as well on how to reheat the food you made. No effort whatsoever. According to the USDA, hot food can be placed directly in the refrigerator, as the thermostat will keep running to maintain a safe temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius. I find this statement to be acceptable in relation to professional environments, but I can hardly see how it applies to the average fridge that most of us own. For this reason, unless you are sure that your fridge is a food chilling beast, I do recommend against placing hot food in it, as it would increase the internal temperature of the whole thing and potentially lead to a quicker food spoilage. An interesting fact: have you ever wondered what the coolest part of a fridge is for quick cooling? There are two answers to this. The first answer is the back. The reason for this is that the biggest source of heat in the fridge is usually the warm air you let in every time you open the door. And since the back of the fridge is further away from the door, it tends to stay cooler. The second answer is the bottom shelves. This is because cold air sinks and collects at the bottom of the fridge. Although you should know that if your fridge has an ice-making compartment on top, then the rule is the opposite and the top shelves are the coldest. This is pretty much all there is to it, and if all went according to plans, by now you should be some sort of meal preparation guru. I'm confident that with this general information, you'll be able to create some seriously delicious and nutritious food that is safe to store, travels well, and can be consumed for as long as possible without being in any way dangerous to your health. I seriously hope that this series will help not only all the people who are into cooking food in advance, but also all of those who, for one reason or another, keep sharing meal prep videos without having a clue about how food preparation and storage really work, potentially putting at serious risk inexperienced cooks and young viewers. Is it possible to prepare food in advance that is cheap, alarmingly good, and healthy at the same time? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do, so stay glued to the screen and keep your eyes peeled. In this episode we are going to prepare beetroot flavored and colored bulgur wheat, a luscious sriracha vegetable stir fry, a squash and red lentil curry, and some crystallized nuts that I'm sure you will absolutely love. Let's get things done. We picked bulgur wheat as a grain for this meal prep, and you can cook it as instructed on the packet. What we like to do is to use the absorption method and replace half of the cooking liquid with beetroot juice. It adds extra nutrition, flavor, and loads of color to the grains, which never hurts. Can't find bulgur wheat? No worries. Pick another grain and substitute half of the water of the recipe with beetroot, carrot, or any other brightly colored juice. If you use grains that need to be boiled, you can still use this technique. Reserve the cooking water after draining the grains and use it for the next recipe in line, which is the squash and lentil curry. How is that for a tip? To begin with the curry, place a saucepan over a medium heat, tip in the oil and the garlic, and gently fry it until slightly golden in color. Now, add in the onions, stir, and cook them until just translucent. Next, add in the paprika and the curry powder and stir them in. Once the spices have been mixed in, add the lentils to the pan, stir, and then tip in the diced squash. We used a mixture of squashes and pumpkins here, just to prove that they all work beautifully. Now, pour in the water, add the tomato paste, and stir once again to complete the adding and stirring process. At this point, bring the liquid to the boil, turn the heat down to the minimum, cover the pan with the lid, and cook the ingredients for 20 minutes to complete the recipe. There is no need to stir during the cooking time, but if you really are that curious, you are allowed to lift the lid for a few seconds at any point in time to check if the ingredients are happy. They generally are anyway. Once the cooking time has elapsed, turn off the heat, add in the garam masala, the chopped coriander, and stir. Leave the flavors to get to know each other for about 15 minutes off the heat, and after that you'll find yourself in front of one of the easiest and most rewarding pumpkin curries you have ever tasted, I promise. For the vegetable stir fry, place a pan over a medium heat, tip in the oil, and gently fry the cumin until fragrant. Next, add in the ginger and cook it until it starts to change color, which should take 1 or 2 minutes. Next, add in the carrots, the peppers, the broccoli, and the water, and saute the ingredients for roughly 6 or 7 minutes, stirring regularly. Make sure to keep some extra water to hand, just in case the amount used evaporates faster than expected, as water can be temperamental at times. Once the vegetables are almost ready, add in the spring onions and the sriracha sauce and stir them in. We like to add the onions toward the end, so that they retain more of their natural crunch. Now we are going to continue with the cooking process for another 2 minutes, and that is all there is to it. The use of sriracha and cumin together creates a very interesting flavor combination that really marries well with the vegetables we used. And now, let's get to the crystallized nuts. For the crystallized nuts, start by adding the sugar into a saucepan, followed by the water. Next, turn on the heat to medium and stir the ingredients until a syrup is formed and it starts boiling. You want to bring the syrup to 135 degrees Celsius before adding in the nuts. However, if you don't have a food thermometer, simply wait for the syrup to start to change color. As soon as you perceive a slight change in hue, throw in the nuts and start stirring. You will see that within seconds, the sugar will begin to crystallize around the nuts, coating them to perfection. These nuggets of flavor make a fantastic quick sugar fix, and also the sense of achievement that comes from making them is simply unparalleled. During the preparation we added no extra salt whatsoever, apart from the one in the sriracha, so make sure to taste the dishes and to tune them to your taste buds. Alternatively, simply pack some salt with you and sprinkle it over the food before eating it. If you follow these recipes, you will obtain 4 meals of 600 calories each, but if you feel that this is not enough for you, or too much, make sure to scale the recipe to meet your personal needs. In this meal prepping episode, we are going to prepare a cumin and lime flavored rice, some miso glazed root vegetables, and a lip-smacking smoked marinated tofu that I'm sure you will love. Let's get to the recipes. To begin with the rice, let's roast the cumin. To do that, place a pan over a medium heat, tip in the cumin, and roast it until it becomes aromatic and starts to smoke lightly, which should take no more than a couple of minutes. For the rice, we are using basmati rice due to its intense and beautiful aroma. We like to cook it using the absorption method, but you can cook it as you please or as instructed on the packet. As soon as the rice has absorbed all the water, or has been drained if you boiled it, add the lime zest and the roasted cumin to it and fluff it with a fork. Cover the rice once again and let the flavors infuse for 10 minutes. Once the time has elapsed, lift the lid and be prepared to smell one of the most aromatic and easy rice dishes in the whole world. And now to the glazed vegetables. Start by preheating the oven to 200 degrees Celsius, 390 degrees Fahrenheit, and then place the soy sauce, the syrup, and the miso into a bowl and stir to combine them. Next, add in the oil and stir again to complete the mixture. For the vegetables, you can cut them as you prefer. We went for a sort of random cut, but chip-shaped vegetables also work perfectly. Now, add the vegetables to the bowl and stir to properly coat them with the glaze. Here we are using equal quantities of parsnip, carrots and potatoes, but feel free to be as creative as you want with this preparation in regard to using other vegetables. Next, place the veggies in an oven tray lined with greaseproof paper, level them down with a spatula, cover the tray with aluminium foil and bake for 10 minutes. Once the time has elapsed, take the tray out of the oven and remove the foil. Now stir the veggies, sprinkle the chopped onions on top of them and bake the vegetables for another 15 minutes. Once the time is up, the vegetables are ready and all you need to do to complete the recipe is to give them a good stir and to add plenty of fresh parsley to them. And don't turn the oven off just yet, but lower its temperature to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit, as that's what we need for the next recipe in line. For the tofu, place the ingredients for the marinade into a bowl, that is the sugar, the lime juice, the oil, the soy sauce and the paprika, and stir to properly combine them. To balance the meal as much as possible, we are using the juice of the lime we used for the rice, but lemon juice or vinegar work just as well. Now, slice the tofu into 1 cm slabs, roughly half an inch, drench them in the marinade, and place them onto an oven tray lined with greaseproof paper. The quantity of marinade is slightly more than needed for the tofu, which will allow you to comfortably drench the tofu in it and to preserve some to drizzle over the food in the following days. Now, place the tray in the oven and bake the tofu for 10 minutes. Once the time has elapsed, remove the tray from the oven and add some extra marinade on the surface of the slices, and place the tray back into the oven to cook for the last 10 minutes. A couple of tips. Firstly, the darker the soy sauce you use, the deeper the color of the tofu will be. And secondly, if you want to achieve a darker exterior, you can remove the tray from the oven a couple of more times during the cooking process, say every 5 minutes, and add some extra marinade on the tofu. The more marinade you add, the stronger the smoked flavor will be, and the darker color you will obtain. I can't think of a better way to pull off such a delicious Asian-inspired meal in such a short amount of time. And even if you are not into meal prepping yourself, don't be afraid of trying these recipes on their own, as they are all quite impressive considering how quick it is to rustle them up. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Corner. Here you have our recipe for a renowned Japanese preparation, miso soup. This dish, as we mentioned in our recipe for dashi stock, is all but vegan, as one of its ingredients is fish. We know how people love this soup, so we decided to turn it into a fat-free vegan delicacy. We also wanted to point out that making miso soup better than any standard Japanese restaurant is dead easy, as they usually prepare it by mixing a small bag of instant dashi stock with water, which is quite far from being healthy. To begin with, let's rehydrate the seaweed. Place it into a small bowl and cover it with cold water. Within 10 minutes, the few small pieces of dehydrated wakame will transform into big leaves. Drain the seaweed and remove the edible part from the central veins, which are quite hard and not very pleasant to eat. Chop the seaweed into smaller pieces. Now take a spring onion and slice it into small round pieces. Next ingredient to add is the tofu. You can use as much as you want of it, as it is mainly needed for presentation's purposes. However, we like to add very little tofu to our soup and to cut it into tiny small dices. What can I say? We are perfectionists. Now to the main ingredient of the dish, the actual soup. Heat the dashi stock until it starts steaming and you see small bubbles forming on the bottom of the pan. Now turn off the heat and stir in the miso. How much miso, you might ask? Well, add it a little at a time until the soup has the level of savouriness that matches with your personal taste. Now, miso is very difficult to dissolve in water, and it also often contains some bigger pieces, which are not desirable into the final soup. To solve this problem, we are using a miso strainer for this task, called misokoshi in Japan. If you do not have this piece of equipment, you can simply use a small fine mesh sieve or a tea strainer. But if you do not have a Japanese miso strainer, then what are you playing at? Everyone has a misokoshi at home, right? The variety of different miso available seems infinite. However, the most popular ones are red miso and white miso. Red miso being the word's most utilized to prepare miso soup. Now let's put the pieces together to create the final soup. For the sake of demonstration, we are making a single portion here by using a small ceramic Japanese bowl, as it is cute and appropriate. However, if you have a larger appetite, don't be shy and use a salad bowl instead. The first thing to go in are the onions, followed by the seaweed. Now add the tofu and simply pour in the soup to complete the dish. Here is the final miso soup, full of flavor and packed with umami. In case you have a savory tooth, this dish will surely satisfy it, as it is considered one of the most delicious food ever invented. The phenomenal taste makes it the perfect starter for any meal. Today's recipe is about a famous stock, Japanese dashi. This preparation is probably more famous when used in conjunction with other ingredients to create miso soup, but that's another recipe which unfortunately isn't getting covered today. If you don't already know this, regular dashi is not a vegan preparation, and in fact, is not even vegetarian, as one of its ingredients is katsuobushi, otherwise known as skipjack tuna. As we are sure you know by now, we love animals, and we are not going to use any for our preparations. Well, actually we will use some animals today, but you'll see what I mean in just a minute. Despite the absence of the tuna, this dashi will still taste out of this world, and we are sure you love it. To begin with, pour the water into a bowl and dip in the dehydrated mushrooms. You have two options here. You can either place the bowl in the fridge and leave the mushrooms to soak overnight, or gently warm up the water slightly above body temperature and soak the mushrooms at room temperature for 2 to 4 hours. Once the time has elapsed, you can remove the mushrooms from the water. You can use the rehydrated shiitake mushrooms for any recipe you desire, and they will add some interesting woody and savory notes to almost any dish. Strain the liquid through a fine sieve lined with a piece of wet kitchen paper, ensuring you use paper with a cute animal design on it. And you have obtained shiitake dashi. Now, of course, the recipe doesn't end here, as shojin dashi is made by mixing two different stocks, so we are still missing one, kombu stock. To prepare the second stock, place the water into a saucepan and warm it up until it starts steaming and you see small air bubbles appearing on the sides and the bottom of the pan. If you want to be fancy, use a thermometer and bring the water to 80 degrees Celsius, which is about 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the water is at the right temperature, Tip in the kombu, cover with the lid and let it to infuse for 1 hour before moving on. Once the time has elapsed, remove the kombu from the water. Make sure to use chopsticks for this task, just to make the whole recipe a little more Asian. You can now strain the second stock by using the same method as the first, but once again remember that using kitchen paper with cute animals on it is essential, as this will have a major positive effect on the taste of the final dish. This time you might need to wring the paper at the end of the straining, as kombu releases some gelling agent which clogs the paper pores and makes the task of straining slightly more difficult. Now both the stocks could be used as they are. The kombu one has the taste of the sea, and the shiitake has a deep and rich earthy taste. However, it is by combining the two of them that you will achieve a proper shojin dashi, and regardless of the recipe you are going to prepare with this stock, it will end up stunning, guaranteed. Simply mix 2 parts of kombu stock with 1 part of shiitake stock, and you will find yourself with an amazing vegan dashi. This stock doesn't carry much flavor on its own, but it's packed with umami. Umami is the taste that adds savoriness to a dish, and it is well desirable in recipes such as soups and curries. Here you have our first recipe for a delicious fat-free vegan stew, which in this case is a mushroom and potato one. This is by far the best stew we have ever had the pleasure to try, and hopefully you will enjoy the preparation and give it a try yourself to confirm that this one really is an extraordinary dish. To begin with, let's start by chopping some vegetables. First, the garlic into thin slices unless you have other preferred shapes. Then, slice some ginger and chop it as finely as possible. Next up are the tomatoes, which should be cut into small pieces. We are using cherry tomatoes here, and cutting them into 12 parts seems to be just right for the task. If using larger tomatoes, make sure to adjust the size. For the mushrooms, simply dice them into big chunks. Make sure not to cut them too small, as they have a high water content and they will end up very small once cooked, and you surely don't want to lose their amazing crunchy texture. Now simply peel and dice the potatoes. A good size is roughly half an inch, or a little more of a centimeter if you live on our side of the pond. For this recipe, make sure to use waxy salad potatoes, as if you use the ones for baking, the floury ones, there is a chance that they will completely break apart during the first 15 minutes of the cooking process, and you'll end up with a soup, which is not necessarily what we want to see at the end of the recipe. And finally, let's start cooking this terrific stew. Take your favorite pot, add in some of your favorite local organic fat-free oil, which is once again water, and turn on the heat to medium. Dip in the ginger, the garlic and the mustard seeds and stir well to combine. Bring the liquid to a boil and cook the ingredients until they are soft and translucent. Now add the chopped tomatoes and cook them until they soften a bit, roughly 4 or 5 minutes. Now add the mushrooms, the paprika, some pepper and stir to combine the ingredients. Cook for another 5 minutes, making sure to keep an eye on the pot and to stir frequently, as we really don't want the ingredients to start catching to the pan. Once the time has elapsed, add the potatoes and stir. Now add the tomato sauce, the water, or stock if you prefer, and stir again to properly combine all the ingredients together. Now bring the liquid to a boil, cover the pot with a lid and lower the heat to the minimum so that the mixture simmers just lightly. Cook the ingredients for 15 minutes over the lowest heat, and in this case, there is really no need for your eyes to remain glued to the pot, so you can sit back and relax, knowing full well that a magical stew is cooking. Once the time has elapsed, throw in the peas and increase the heat to medium. Cook the stew for another 10 minutes so that the potatoes have the time to properly cook and the liquid to reduce, hence thickening the stew. If you prefer your stew to be thick, you have 2 options. The first is to cook it for another 5 minutes to reduce it even more. The other is to willingly crush a few of the potatoes with a fork, releasing some of their starch and naturally thickening the sauce. Taste-wise, it makes no difference, your choice. And this is the final piping hot stew, ready to be enjoyed during one of those cold days. As we head towards winter, I'm sure you know the feeling pretty well. Unless of course you are one of those people who live in a place where the sun shines all year long, and if that is the case, I think I hate you. The woody notes of the mushrooms perfectly blend with the flavor of the potatoes, and with the added kick of umami from the peas, seriously, you are in for a real treat. The recipe we are going to have a go at today is for a creamy, luscious and incredibly smooth pumpkin soup. Soups in general tend to be labeled as healthy food, but what people don't know is that they are regularly loaded with cream, butter and oil, as it is very easy to hide these unhealthy ingredients in a liquid preparation. Well, we are taking a stand. We will definitely not be throwing any of these ingredients into our recipe today. So let's see together how to prepare a truly healthy soup which still tastes out of this world. The first thing to do is to peel, clean and slice the pumpkin. Any kind of squash will work with this recipe, but make sure it is ripe to perfection if you want to obtain an outstanding soup. Our favorite squash is definitely green kabocha with its chestnutty flavor and dense texture. And what's yours? Next ingredient on our list is the onion, which must be finely sliced to allow for faster cooking. We are now ready to begin with the cooking process. Place a pan over high heat. Pour in some fat-free oil, which is water, and add the onions. Sweat the onions until they are soft and translucent, adding a little more water anytime that is required. This should take just a few minutes. When the onions are ready, dip in the sliced pumpkin and stir the ingredients. Add the stock to the pan and stir again. The liquid should be enough to cover the ingredients just lightly. Bring the stock to a simmer before covering the pan with the lid and turning the heat down to low. The ingredients should now cook for 20 minutes and the stock should simmer during the entire time. Once the time is up, turn off the heat. Now we have to add the most important ingredient, which is rosemary. Some ingredients are really meant to be combined together to create something extraordinary. And here you have a great example. Rosemary and pumpkin complement each other to a degree that we never thought it would be possible. Basically, they are like soulmates. Add the rosemary to the pan, submerge it into the liquid and cover again with the lid. Leave the herb to infuse into the stock for 20 minutes. During this time, all the flavor of the rosemary will spread into the liquid, giving an extra woody note to the final soup. When the time is up, remove the rosemary and get ready to blend the ingredients. Place the cooked ingredients into the blender's jug and blend at high speed for 30-40 seconds to create the most delicious and aromatic pumpkin soup. If you want to turn the soup into a masterpiece, we still have a few additions to make. Transfer the soup into a bowl, then add a pinch of cayenne pepper, some vinegar and a pinch of salt. Stir one last time. And there you have it. We find it amazing that something so simple can be so extraordinarily delicious. This soup is extremely smooth and has a luscious feel to it, and we can guarantee it will impress even the fussiest of tastes. One of the many things you can do with corn to bring out its sweet taste and delicate flavor is to turn it into the most amazing and creamy corn soup, which is exactly what we are going to do today. The combination of ingredients we are going to use yield a final soup that really has no equal when it comes to flavor and consistency. To begin with, place a pan over a medium heat and add in the garlic, the onion and the squash and saute the vegetables for roughly 5 minutes or until they slightly start catching to the pan. Here we are combining corn with one of its best companions, which is pumpkin. These two elements share many flavor compounds and together they are able to create a more complex dish. Once that's done, add in the corn kernels, the tofu and the stock. Stir well to combine and bring the liquid to the boil. For For this recipe we are using our toasted corn stock, the recipe for which is linked in the cards. This unique and flavorsome stock is made using the parts of the cob that generally get wasted, and using it really elevates the flavor of the soup. However, feel free to use vegetable stock or water instead to obtain a quicker yet still delicious soup. Once the liquid reaches boiling point, simply cover the pan with the lid, turn the heat down to the minimum, and cook the ingredients for exactly 30 minutes. The liquid should simmer just lightly for the entire duration of the cooking time. Once that's done, the recipe is basically finished, and all you have to do is to thoroughly blend the ingredients to obtain the final soup. To do this, you can either use a high-speed blender or a regular stick blender. We are not using any salt in this recipe for a simple reason. Corn is a sweet-tasting ingredient, so trying to cover its sweet notes with salt will require you to add a lot of it. What we do recommend in this case is to add it on the surface of the soup before serving it, and you'll be amazed by how little of it you will need to get a savory dish. After the blending stage, the soup will be ready and delicious tasting, I promise. If you want to get even better results, strain it using a fine sieve to remove the large particles and obtain a crazy smooth cream of corn. To garnish the soup, corn kernels, roasted hazelnuts, dill, and even popcorn work really well. Today's recipe is for one of our favorite warming dishes, something we like to call creamy celeriac soup. Soups can be achieved in thousands different ways and with almost any ingredient. However, when it comes to our soups, we want them to be easy to make and even easier to eat, with zero compromises. This particular soup is a great example of that philosophy. And if you want to know more about this marvelous dish, keep watching and we'll show you exactly how to make it. The beauty of recipes like this is that the most important thing is to get fresh, quality ingredients. If you manage to get fresh and quality ingredients, then it will be a success every single time. I personally vouch for that. To begin with, peel and dice the celeriac. There is no need to be a perfectionist here, as the ingredients will be blended at the end of the cooking process. Next up are the onions, which can be diced or sliced, your choice. Don't ever say we don't give you creative freedom. The final ingredient to prepare is the potatoes. Dice them so they are the same size as the celeriac, as that way the vegetables will cook in roughly the same time. Now add all the chopped ingredients into your favorite pot, followed by the stock, or water if you don't have any stock. Turn the heat on to high and bring the liquid to a boil. As soon as the liquid reaches the boiling point, cover the pot with a lid, lower the heat to the minimum, and simmer the ingredients for 30 minutes, or until they are properly cooked. Once the time has elapsed, blend the ingredients together using a stick blender, or any other blender you prefer. Now add in the mustard, which is a must in this recipe as it is a killer combination with celeriac, and blitz the ingredients once again to obtain a smooth and creamy soup. Now, how easy was that? And here you have the final soup. How does it look for you? Well, I'll tell you how it looks for me. Delicious. With a dish like this, I'm eagerly awaiting it cooling down, so I can finally enjoy it to the fullest. Here you have our recipe for a vegetable stock. Stocks in general are very important in the kitchen, as they can turn a dish from something verging on being worthy into something truly pleasurable to eat. We decided to add an unusual ingredient here, as we wanted to add an umami note to the stock. We are confident that you will be surprised by the final result of this preparation. Now, stocks are not complicated. Well, these ones aren't. Admittedly, we don't have a clue about the stock market, as that's nowhere near as tasty. Anyway, we must note a few simple rules to follow to obtain a great tasting stock. To begin with, slice all the vegetables as fine as possible. The only thing you shouldn't slice finely is the tomato, or it will disintegrate into the water, making a mess. Make sure to keep the pot for the stock nearby so that you can place in all the chopped vegetables. We decided to use red onions here, which will lend some of their color to the water, making the final stock darker. If you are aiming for a clear stock, use white onions instead. Why should you slice all the vegetables so finely if people always use chunkier vegetables to make stocks? The answer is pretty simple. Sliced vegetables give more flavor to the stock, as there is a larger surface area in contact with the water, and they also cook faster. It is up to you to decide if you want to proceed this way, but we can guarantee that the difference between a stock made with finely sliced vegetable and one made with chunkier vegetables is colossal. Now that all the vegetables are ready, place the pot over a high heat, pour in the water and stir. To obtain a powerful stock, there should be enough water so that it only just covers the ingredients. Bring the water to the boil, lower the heat to the minimum and cover with the lid. Cook for exactly 30 minutes. To obtain a proper stock, make sure that the water simmers during the entire process, as it shouldn't boil. Once the time has elapsed, leave the stock to cool completely before straining it, which will also allow for a stronger and more flavorsome taste. When the stock has completely cooled down, strain it into a large bowl by using a sieve lined with a wet muslin cloth. To extract as much flavor and juice as possible, gently bring the cloth. The vegetables can now be discarded as there is not much flavor left in them. And here you have the final stock. Isn't it screaming please drink me? Well, maybe not drink me, but it does scream please use me. And it would be rude not to. We use this stock instead of water to cook rice, couscous and other delicacies we regularly enjoy. For some reason, soups are never amongst the most popular of our recipes, and that's a real shame because I can assure you that if we are sharing a recipe for a soup, it means that it is good, possibly incredible. I mean, what have soups ever done to you? They are never offensive and never ever bite. Maybe you don't like liquidized food? I just can't get over it. I mean, come on, don't be so choosy and just watch this video. To begin with, let's do some heavy chopping. First, the celery, slice it lengthwise into strips and then dice it finely. Then the carrots, first into strips and then diced as finely as desired. Next ingredient to prepare are the onions. In this situation, it is down to personal preference to decide how to dice them, but I like the ingredients all of roughly the same size. The garlic, however, can be simply cut into thin slices. Cut the leeks in 2 parts lengthwise and then slice them finely. The last ingredient to prepare are the mushrooms, which I usually dice into bigger chunks. This is due to the fact that mushrooms release a lot of water during the cooking process, shrinking to roughly 1/3 of their original size. You can use any mushrooms you desire, knowing that more exotic varieties usually yield a more complex and aromatic final soup. If you haven't cut off one of your fingertips with all of this chopping, we are now ready to proceed to the less dangerous part of the recipe. And if you have, then make sure to fish your finger out of the ingredients, as we generally find that fingers give the soup an undesired texture. Moving on, place a pot over a medium heat and throw in all the sliced vegetables apart from the mushrooms. Sweat the vegetables for 2 minutes and then add in a small amount of stock as well as the tomato paste. Stir well to properly dissolve the tomato paste. Add in the mushrooms and mix well to combine them with the rest of the ingredients. It is now time to add the rest of the stock, a pinch of salt, a pinch of pepper, and then stir well to combine once again. Now bring the liquid to a boil, lower the heat to the minimum and cover the pot with a lid. Cook the soup for exactly 30 minutes, making sure to keep it at simmering temperature at all time. Once the time has elapsed, remove the lid and add in the starch mixed with some water, which will thicken the soup just slightly. At this point, if you feel that for some reason the soup is too watery for your personal taste, you can either add more starch or simply cook it without the lid for a few minutes to evaporate some of the excess water, as simple as that. The dish is now ready, but before serving it, remember to taste it and adjust salt if desired. Another great addition to this soup is parsley, but if you want to add it, make sure to do so at the end and in a very small quantity, as it tends to cover the delicate woody flavor of the mushrooms. And here is the final soup, with its hearty and full-bodied flavor. Mushrooms are amongst the most savory of all ingredients, so if you have access to them and happen to fancy a soup, be prepared to taste something special. Today we are offering you our second Christmas-themed recipe, which will make the most amazing and creamy sweet potato soup. We believe that this soup would make the perfect starter for a Christmas meal, and the added hint of ginger really brings it to an exclusive level of festive exquisiteness. If you are a fan of healthy, luscious soups that taste great, then this is definitely the recipe for you, so it's time to get to it. To begin with, let's chop some vegetables. Start with the sweet potatoes, which should be cut into slices. Then move on to the carrots, which should also be cut into slices. Now that I'm thinking about it, all the vegetables should be cut into slices, so we are now trusting you to slice the rest of the vegetables. As ever, it's worth making sure you make them all roughly the same size to allow for even cooking. Tip all the vegetables into a pan, following no specific order, and then add the ginger. Turn on the heat on high and stir well to combine. Add some freshly ground black pepper and sauté the vegetables for roughly 5 minutes without adding any liquid. During this time, the vegetables will caramelize a bit, adding some interesting roasted notes to the final soup. Don't worry if the ingredients slightly catch to the pan, but also be careful not to let them burn. Now, add the stock and the vinegar, then mix well once again to combine. The final ingredient to add is the tofu, and that's the hard work finished, and all that remains to be done is to bring the liquid to a boil, cover the pan with the lid, lower the heat to the minimum, and cook the ingredients for exactly 30 minutes. The liquid should simmer for the duration of the cooking time. Once the time has elapsed, turn off the heat and remember to remove the ginger before moving on, as blending it into the soup will compromise the final flavor. Once the ingredients are cool, simply blend them into the most amazingly smooth sweet potato soup. If you believe that the resulting soup is a bit too thick for your personal taste, simply add a touch of stock and blend again to turn it into your own perfect masterpiece. Once blended, remember to add salt if desired, so that the soup better matches with your own personal taste. If you want to add a little bit of heat in this dish, why not using a hint of cayenne pepper to make things even more interesting and fiery? You can do so after the soup has been blended, by adding the spice a little at a time. And here you have the final Christmassy sweet potato soup. Whilst cooking this beauty, the most amazing aroma spreads all over your house, which is one of the things I like the most about cooking. I mean, who doesn't like having the smell of delicious food all over the place during Christmas? Not that I mind it on any other day of the year either. If there is something we don't like, it has to be wasting quality ingredients. There are parts of the corn fruit that are generally thrown away, as it is believed that they can't create flavor, but we beg to differ, and we are about to turn the least important parts of the corn ear into the most amazing roasted corn stock. To begin with, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius, which is about 360 degrees Fahrenheit. Now simply remove the leaves from the cobs, using whichever method you prefer. The parts of the corn ear we are going to use for the stock are the leaves and the center of the cob itself, which are tastier than most people would believe. Now place all the leaves onto an oven tray, making sure to not overcrowd it, as you want the leaves to get an equal amount of heat during the cooking process. Once that's done, cover the leaves with a cooling rack or lay a few pieces of cutlery onto the leaves. Spoons or knives work perfectly to keep them flat. Now simply pop the tray into the oven and roast the leaves for roughly 10 to 15 minutes. At the end of the roasting process, you will end up with a tray full of beautifully browned and very aromatic corn leaves, ready to release all of their flavor into the water. Now let's move on to the corn ear. First, cut off the shank and the tip from the cob, to make the next step easier and safer. Now, line a deep container with a kitchen towel and use a knife to cut the kernels from the cob. Using this method, the corn kernels won't end up all over your kitchen, and you won't have any cleaning to do at the end, which is always a bonus. The corn kernels are not needed for this recipe, and you can use them for any corn-based dish you desire, or to make a deliciously creamy corn soup that we will be sharing next. Now, to the cobs. For the sake of feeling like a bodybuilder, break the center of the cob into 2 parts. We feel we should mention that this process has absolutely no effect on the final result of the recipe. Place a pot large enough to accommodate all the ingredients onto a medium heat, tip in the cobs, the roasted leaves, the water, and stir the ingredients. The roasted leaves will soon rehydrate and become soft. Bring the liquid to the boil, cover the pan with the lid, turn the heat to the minimum, and cook the ingredients for 30 minutes. Once the cooking time has elapsed, turn off the heat and let the stock cool down completely before moving on. Once the stock is cool, simply strain it using a fine mesh sieve to complete the recipe. After this step, you will end up with a super aromatic stock that will lend roasted corn notes to any dish you desire. I like to use this flavorsome liquid to cook grains, to make broths, and also in conjunction with the corn kernels to obtain the most amazing corn soups.
What's for dinner? Let's take a look. What's for dinner? No time to cook. What's for dinner? What's for dinner? What's for dinner? A busy day. What's for dinner? It's time to play. What's for dinner? A friendly kitchen is all you need. It's quick and easy. Just wait and see. What's for dinner?
Hello, and welcome to What's for Dinner, the cooking show that promises to bring you dinner in about half an hour. I'm Ken Kostick.
Hello, and I'm Mary Jo Eustace Kostick, and that's correct. We're going to be making an absolutely wonderful, fabulous. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm
Thought you
fine.
were going to go over on that one.
I'm
Help
fine.
by fallen type deal?
Just bang my head.
Okay, so you're okay then?
I am.
Okay, we're going to be having an absolutely wonderful, eclectic meal tonight, and Ken is going to be making.
I'm going to start the show with marinated mushrooms because they have to sit for a while in the fridge.
Exactly.
And cool.
To marinate.
I'm also doing a fabulous garlic bread and a minestrone soup from all leftover vegetables.
Oh, that'll be absolutely delicious. Do you want to know what I'm doing?
What are you doing?
I'm going to be doing a bow tie pasta with homemade meatballs and tomato sauce. I'm busy. Are you sure you're okay?
I'm fine.
Okay. If you want to pick up that pen, I'm going to give you the ingredients that you're going to need for this absolutely delicious dish. You will need half a pound of lean ground beef, 1 small onion chopped, 4 cloves of garlic, 1 egg, 1